Hi, this is Alessio Aristani, Leading Trader. Hope you're well. In this video, I'm going to share with you the truth about what's really going on in the Middle East right now. In fact, some of the information I'm going to share with you, the media does not even talk about, or perhaps does not want you to know about. Plus, in this video, I'm going to reveal to you why this chart is proof that we're heading for a war and a long drawn-out conflict in the Middle East. I'm going to explain to you exactly what's going on here on that chart in a few moments. But first of all, let me reveal to you exactly what's going on in the Middle East, which many people in the media are not even talking about. You see, we have to first understand who Iran's real enemies are. For a very long time, Saudi Arabia has been jealous and resentful of any positive relationship between Iran and the United States and the West. Now, ask yourself this question: why has Saudi Arabia always resented and always been against any positive relationship between Iran and the West? You see, when Saudi Arabia keeps telling the world that Iran is a threat because it wants to create nuclear weapons, that is an absolute lie, for two reasons. Number one, we already know that Iran does not have any nuclear weapons, and even if it did want to create any, that would be suicide. And Iran already knows that would be a suicidal decision. No, the real threat to Saudi Arabia is not nuclear weapons or a nuclear Iran. No, the real threat is actually what's going on here on this chart. Now, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you or anyone that the country which has the biggest oil reserve in the world is Saudi Arabia. But you'll notice that Iran is among the top 5. In fact, the number 3 here as the country with the biggest oil reserve. Now, let's take a look at the next chart. You'll see here that after Saudi Arabia, the only other country in the Middle East that has the highest petroleum production is Iran. So Saudi Arabia and Iran are the two biggest producers of petroleum in the Middle East. Now, it's possible, some of you are probably thinking right now, well, this is not news. We already knew this. So what? Well, before I show you the next chart, it is important to first appreciate that Saudi Arabia sees Iran as a major competitor. And the one thing the Saudis don't want is competition. In fact, let me show you this. What you see here on this chart are Iran's biggest customers. And as you can see, the top 3 are China, India, and Korea. Now you can begin to understand why Saudi Arabia never wanted the Iran deal in the first place and why the Saudis kept telling the world that Iran is a threat. The threat to the Saudis was never about nuclear weapons. In fact, it was about money and power, and who gets to have it, and who gets to sell oil and petroleum products to these 3 countries. Now, let's just think about that. Now that the Saudis have succeeded in breaking the Iran nuclear deal and imposing sanctions on Iran, that means Saudi Arabia has now managed to remove its major competitor in being able to sell to these countries, China, India, and Korea. Wow, what a big surprise. So, not only has Saudi Arabia managed to successfully remove its major competition in the Middle East, it has also done something else very important. You see, by lobbying very hard to break the nuclear deal between the US and Iran, the Saudis also know the only outcome is going to be war or a prolonged conflict in the Middle East. And what does war and conflict do in the Middle East? It drives the price of crude oil higher, and when crude oil prices go higher, guess who makes more money? The people who get to sell the oil, especially to their now new customers. Now, take a look at this. This is the chart of Iran's inflation rate. Inflation in Iran has skyrocketed. And the new harsh sanctions which are going to be placed on Iran are only going to make things far worse and cause the economy collapse further, which means that the only solution for Iran down the line is going to be war. Now, there is one other very shocking connection between Saudi Arabia and the world that the media does not talk about, and I think it's important that we address it because not many people know about this. Now, the person you see here is a man that I respect and admire. He is Robert Kiyosaki, which you might recognize. He's the famous author of a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I recommend everyone should read. He is also a gold and silver investor, and also very interestingly, some years ago he wrote a book with Donald Trump, and the book they wrote together is called Why We Want You to Be Rich. Now, listen to what Robert Kiyosaki says in this very interesting and revealing interview with a journalist.
1971, Nixon took the world off the gold standard. And after that, the Federal Reserve Bank controlled the world, and they could flood the world with fiat money. I mean, currency, that's paper. That's all it is. And throughout history, any time a nation has gone to fiat currency, in other words, government-sponsored money, the money has absolutely gone to zero. The Federal Reserve Bank is not a bank. It is owned by the richest European and some Saudi money in the world. And the Federal Reserve Bank is the one that has caused this crisis.
What Robert Kiyosaki says there in that video is very interesting, because not many people know that the U.S. Federal Reserve is not just a bank, but it's owned by very rich European and Saudi money. And now you can begin to understand the deeper connection between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Federal Reserve, which, if you think about it, not only is that corrupt, but it's deeply undemocratic. And we can begin to understand why something like this can happen when just recently the U.S. sold 6,700 missiles to Saudi Arabia as part of a $1 billion deal. You might be thinking that perhaps I'm criticizing President Trump's decision to walk away from the Iran deal. Not at all. That is not true at all. Firstly, as you know, I'm not political. I don't care about left-wing or right-wing politics at all. That's an illusion. No, my own personal belief is that perhaps President Trump did not care about the Iran deal all that much, even though he did talk against it in the past. I personally think his recent decision to walk away from the deal is mainly due to the influence of this man here, John Bolton, who is the new National Security Advisor. As you probably know, John Bolton is a well-known war hawk. He's a warmonger. I think that it was mainly due to the influence of this man here that we walked away from the Iran deal.
Let me, you wrote this in 2011 about Saudi Arabia. It's the world's biggest funder of terrorism. Saudi Arabia funnels our petrodollars, our very own money, to fund the terrorists that seek to destroy our people while the Saudis rely on us to protect them.
Saudi Arabia makes $1 billion a day, okay? They make $1 billion a day. Saudi Arabia, if it weren't for us, they wouldn't be there. They wouldn't exist. They should pay us.
To go back to Saudi Arabia, if they're a funder of terrorists, why should we have diplomatic relations with them at all?
Well, look, I'm not a big fan.
Should we be holding them more accountable?
Well,
they treat women poorly.
The primary reason we're with Saudi Arabia is because we need the oil. Now we don't need the oil so much.
But I want to show you what's happening here on this chart, because this chart speaks volumes about what could likely be happening next in the Middle East. And in fact, if anything, I think this chart is telling us that we're heading for a war or massive conflict in the Middle East. This is the chart of Lockheed Martin. Now that name should be familiar to you because that is the company that essentially manufactures and makes military machines in aerospace. In other words, airplanes like this. So Lockheed Martin, let me just show you, in case you're wondering what is the connection between Lockheed Martin and the stock markets. Take a look at this. This is what happened between the year 2001 and 2003, right before the Iraq War started. As you'll see that between that period, the stock markets was in a massive bear market. In fact, if anything, the stock markets were plunging lower. They were in a downward trend. During that same period, look what happened to Lockheed Martin. Now, it should come as no surprise why Lockheed Martin was actually going higher. In fact, it doubled in value during the same period because right over here, right about here, as you can see, this is September 2001 when the 9/11 attacks happened. And you can see immediately after the markets plunged, but look what happened to Lockheed Martin. Their stock prices soared. And as you can see here, throughout the long-term conflict that ended up in the Iraq War, their stock prices continued to go up and up higher. So guys, if there is one stock that can tell us that a war is likely, it is this one, Lockheed Martin. Keep an eye on it. And in fact, you will see just in the last few days, Lockheed Martin stock prices have been rising. We're now above the 200 moving average as a key support level. That's a green line you see there. We're now above that level. And I really hope I'm wrong about this. But if war is likely, then it's a very fair bet that Lockheed Martin prices are likely to rise higher in the next few months and going through the rest of the year. All right, guys, let me know what you think. Do you agree or disagree with what I've just said here? In fact, what is your opinion? And thanks very much for watching, guys. If you found this video to be useful and interesting, please give it a thumbs up. And also, please remember to subscribe to our videos for future updates. Thanks very much.